Welcome to this live stream, Windows on the World, windowsontheworld.net. We do a new show every Monday, 8 p.m. UK time, 8 p.m. GMT. And tonight we're going to be exploring the past. We did a show about the Scythians a few weeks ago, and we're going to go back further to a culture which spread across the whole of Europe. So we're talking from Albania, Turkey, Indus Valley, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Eastern Europe. And this is an interlinked civilization from about 8,000 years ago. Now, the way I got into this was actually looking at the Tartarian Tablets, and we're going to get into that as well. The Tartarian Tablets were actually found in Romania in a village called Tartaria in about 1961, and they basically rewrote history. In other words, that there was an advanced writing system in Europe and across the whole continent at least 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. And then we go further back and we get to 8,000 years. So presumably you may have seen these. I'll just check on the screen. These are runes, you see these runes here? Well, they actually date back 8,000 years. And they date back to a culture called the Vinca or the Vinca culture, which actually originated in Serbia. And we're going to get into that as we go along. I've got some detail and I want to bring that up because I don't want to miss anything. So yes, we're talking about a runic system, which a lot of people associate with Scandinavia and of course Britain. But if our assumptions or our projections are correct, there was an advanced civilization that may have actually come from the north and emigrated south. The actual official line on this is that the Indus Valley culture actually came out of the Indus Valley and moved upwards due to some sort of cataclysm, or maybe they ran out of water. These are the sort of official explanations. And of course, now we get climate change. But what's really interesting is I found some papers over the last few days, which are absolutely fascinating. And they're actually from academia.edu. And I will put a link to those when this live stream is finished, because they are part of the research that I've used for tonight's show. So yes, we're talking about Sumeria, the Indus Valley, Central Europe, Turkey, out to Pakistan, Tajikistan, and up as far as Kazakhstan. And we're going to be talking about this writing system, which includes in its symbolism the swastika. Now, a lot of people actually believe that the swastika is an ancient Asian and Hindu symbol. Not true at all. It actually came out of this 8,000-year-old culture and out of this runic system. And originally, these tablets which were found, the Tartarian tablets, they were very similar to the runic writing. And as we went back into the Vinca culture, we found out that they're exactly the same as all of those runic letters, which I just showed you, which are these here. So the cultures were actually assimilating. And what we have with this Vinca or Vinca culture is something that was pre-Sumerian. So basically, the biggest civilization that they say was 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, biggest agrarian civilization, which invented its own writing, was from Eridu in Mesopotamia, known as Sumeria, and also Akkadian. So we're going back further than that. So it looks like there was an advanced civilization across Europe. Now, when we look at the Scythians, who came much later, they actually seem to decline just after about 200 BC, I think. And when we look at the Scythian culture, that went all the way across Europe too, up as far as Mongolia. And indeed, it did connect, it seems, with the Indus Valley area. So we've got a culture that predates all of that now. This is the oldest known script and the oldest, most advanced civilization, according to these papers. And yes, the swastika was used in Central Eastern Europe 3,000 years before it was found in Asia. So the cultures were assimilating, and the Sumerians, it appears, inherited the symbols of this Vinca culture, which was actually originating around the Balkans. It originated in Serbia. This is where they found the first artifacts of the Vinca culture. And the Vinca culture revolved around multiple gods, but it was a matriarchal culture rather than a patriarchal culture, because most of the figurines that they found, and they found these figurines of these goddesses in houses in Serbia, they're all female. So this is a very interesting thing. And also it looks like they were quite advanced. They had quite big houses. They were very into art. They traded with a lot of different places. So we're talking about a civilization which is pre-Sumerian, which was actually broader in its geographical scope than Sumeria. So yeah, it went from Serbia through Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania into Greece with connections to the Indus Valley. And modern propaganda says that basically what could have happened to the Indus Valley culture is it disappeared. Well, maybe it just moved and assimilated. There's two different ways of looking at this. You could say that this 8,000-year-old culture may have assimilated the Indus Valley culture, and they moved out when there were issues with the climate, such as rivers drying up. And that would make sense. But there's also this idea that this culture went as far as the Indus Valley and maybe assimilated with them first. Very interesting, isn't it? So yeah, we're going to get into first what got me really interested in all this, the Tartarian Tablets. I'll give you some information about those. They refer to a group of 3 tablets discovered in 1961 by this archaeologist, Nikolai Vlasa, at a Neolithic site in the village of Tartaria, which is about 30 kilometers from Alba Iulia in Romania. So we're not talking about Tartaria, which was this other large landmass, which was up near Russia, Mongolia. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a village called Tartaria in the region of Alba Iulia in Romania. And 2 of these tablets were rectangular and the third one is round. I've actually posted them in the post I created for this show tonight, and I'll be putting the information up about the Tartarian tablets under this video. One was 6 centimeters across, and 2 of them were rectangular, and they have holes drilled in them with this kind of like a cuneiform type script on them. All have symbols inscribed only on one side, and they're dated to, they say, around 5,300 BC. So the official story is this, that this finding has reversed our concept of the origin of writing. This is the Tartarian tablets, and it's now believed that the Sumerians inherited a Vinca tradition of magical or meaningful scripture, probably following the collapse of the Vinca homeland in Serbia around 3,500 BC. Now, they always seem to go on that the civilization has collapsed. Well, there's never really any evidence for this. And this is where I get pretty bored with academia, because what they don't seem to say is that these cultures could have just assimilated and been working with each other. So in other words, there was different regional cultures, but they observed very similar traditions and art. And we can see that. And one of the papers that I was looking at suggests that this Central Eastern European art may have traveled as far as Colombia and to South America. Again, this is conjecture, but most of history is conjecture. There's very little we actually know when we're going back more than 1,000 years. So it says similar motifs have been found on pots. This is the Tartarian tablets excavated at Grajnica in Bulgaria and Vinca in Serbia. And there's quite a lot of other places around the southern Balkans. And we're going to get on to something even older in a minute, but just a thought before we do that, because what I have to remember is that in Central Eastern Europe, the Ottoman Empire ruled for around 500 years, and they wiped out a lot of the culture. For instance, when I was traveling through Central Eastern Europe, I met people who told me that things had been found in Bulgaria during the communist era which were completely hidden by the government, including hominids which somebody says they saw as they were being dug up, and the whole area was filled with concrete. They put a huge wire fence around there, and it's been closed off by the military to this day. So these stories are very indicative of history being covered up. And that is the big problem with Eastern and Central Eastern Europe. And of course, after the Ottomans came the communists. And these countries were only liberated from communism around 1988 to 1990. So when you think about it, these countries have really been under occupation for a very, very long time, at least 550 years. So we're going to go to something even older now. And these were ancient tablets found in South Bulgaria, and they were the oldest European script ever found. And these tablets were unearthed near the southern town of Kardzali and are 7,000 years old, so they say. And they bear the ancient script of the Minoan civilization. So here again, we've got this migratory pattern. And of course, with the Scythians, we have to go back and look who the ancient Greeks actually were. And we covered that in this show. So when we look at ancient Greece, it wasn't just one civilization. It was a conglomerated civilization. And I think that's the important thing, because it was the Romans that seemed to split all this stuff up. The Romans kind of designated these different places to different times, different cultures. But that's not necessarily true. So they talk about this Cretan writing, also known as Linear A script, and it dates back to the 15th to 16th centuries BC. That's quite a long time ago, isn't it? So we're going back, 4,500, 5,000 years here. And this discovery proves the theory, it says, of the Bulgarian archaeologists that the script on the findings is one of the oldest known to humankind. So get that. We're going pre-ancient Egypt, pre-Sumeria. So this is looking much more like there was an advanced civilization that spread across Europe and into the Indus Valley and beyond, into Mongolia. And of course, it went as far as Ukraine. We're going to get onto that as this show goes on. So this is interesting. So the archaeologist Nikolai Ovcharov was heading this archaeological expedition in Perperikon, the Perperikon complex. I was going to visit there, but I never got round to it. It's right on the border with what is now Greece. Now, there's another place near Kardzali, and they say these discoveries are revolutionary. They actually rewrite history. And we're never told about this, of course. These things just disappear. Academia doesn't like it because they might have to rewrite the books, and they don't like doing that. So Ovcharov, who was heading the archaeological expedition, says these were revolutionary finds. So we've got archaeologists here who are used to excavating these sites, which go back at least 5,000 to 8,000 years. And they're saying these finds are not like anything else we've ever seen. And it says it throws a completely different light on Bulgaria's history. So this is an interesting point because it takes us back to the Ottomans and also to the communist regimes that swept across Eastern Europe after the Second World War. So what we have in those last 50 years of communism is the wiping out of history. And of course, the Ottomans had 500 years to wipe out the indigenous history of countries such as Bulgaria. So the Vinca culture is named after a village near Belgrade where it says significant artifacts were first discovered. And this culture thrived in the Balkans. Now, the Balkan area is a very temperate climate. It doesn't get too hot. As you go down into Greece, into Turkey, it gets a lot hotter. but you've got a very good temperature, especially if you're staying on the valleys or the valleys which divide the mountain regions. So, yes, so this culture thrived in present-day Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, and Greece during the Neolithic era, and they're saying 5,500 to 4,500 BC. And the Tartarian tablet script and the Vinca script are similar. They are almost identical again to these, the Scandinavian runes. So the symbols are found over a broad geographic area, it says here. So again, this is something that I think is really useful, because if we think of the runes as being from the north, from the Scandinavian areas, maybe they were from the central part of Europe and spread outwards. We don't really know. I mean, of course, the runic alphabet was used by the Scandinavians and the Britons till quite late. So this is also something to remember. Yes, so there's another one that's similar, it says here, to the Tartarian Tablets, and it's called the Dispilio tablet from Greece. And these symbols are again very much like the runic symbolism and the symbolism which is found on the Tartarian tablets. And this is very like symbolism which has been found in China, known as the Jiahu symbols in China. So it's not impossible, is it, that trading people spread out and had a common language? We've talked about this before. And it was with Stephen and Evan Strong when I interviewed them about the first global language. And of course, Frederick Slater, who discovered this in Australia, was the go-to historian until he started talking about this. Then, of course, he was a conspiracy theory nutcase and still remains one to this day. But at the time, he was the foremost archaeological person to go to in Australia in the early part of the century. So that's what they do. Academia has got a lot to answer for. And of course, it's all about keeping the status quo, the common good. And the people within academia can only really talk about what they want to talk about when they've taken their retirement check, unless they want to get kicked out. And I know plenty of people who were kicked out. And in recent times, it's been over the biggest lie in recent human history, which, of course, I think we all know what that is. So, yeah, one big original Balkan culture is what this hints at. It says Southwest Europe, which lasted continuously, this culture, more than 1,000 years. But again, they say it mysteriously disappears at 4,500 BC. And the capital of this archaeological site, where it all started for the archaeologists, was a place called Belobrado, or White Hill, in the village of Vinca or Vinca, which is today part of the Serbian capital, Belgrade. So this is fantastic, isn't it? I mean, I drove through Serbia about a year ago, and very interesting mix of cultures. Once you start going through Eastern and Central Eastern Europe, you start to see connections. And of course, there's still a lot of very ancient culture there in the villages. So you start seeing that there are similarities between a lot of these cultures. And there's a lot of stuff which is very much in tune with Northern European culture, even though, of course, the music is very, very different because they use Balkan beats, which are completely different from North European music. But yeah, so this excavation in 1908 till 1921 by the archaeologist Miloji Vazic, he published books on this, and he found the Vinca culture in Serbia. So it was only in the early part of this century that this was found. And in the same time with the Vinca and before, there were two older cultures. So we're going back now to the culture of Lepenski Vir, which was 9,500 to around 7,000 BC. That's what they're saying. and the Starcevo culture, which also preceded the Vinca culture, 8,000 to around 5,400 BC. Of course, these are just markers that they've put in time. What I would like to add here is I think that these cultures were absorbed. They became part of a much larger culture, which became more generalized. And when I was doing research about the Vinca culture, they were saying that this was a very civilized era. The people were very good at trading. They were very good at art. Their houses were very large. They had murals. They had a very engaging society. And it was much more interconnected than any society is now. So when we talk about advanced civilizations, we actually have to get right what we mean by that. What do we mean by an advanced civilization? Because in Northern Europe, the civilization is degrading, degenerating. So we're talking about people who are probably more advanced thinkers and better communicators, and we're going back 8,000 years. Again, we're not talking about savages here. We're talking about people who are pretty competent at what they were doing. So it says the Starcevo had the same genes as the Vinca or the Vinca, the old Europa genes mixed with Anatolian genes. So here we have the Turkic influence coming in. And it says while the Lipensky Vir had only the old European genes. So the Starcevo were mixed with the Anatolian genes and the old European genes, and the Lipensky, they had only the old European genes, and they then became conglomerated into the Vinca or the Vinca culture. And it was very prevalent along the rivers of the Vardar, the Moravia, the Danube, and the Sava, moving north and west to Pannonia, Bosnia, Croatia, Slovenia, Hungary, and Germany. So this is very interesting, isn't it? Because Germany had runic alphabet, the North European runic alphabet, which we're told is Scandinavian and Brit orientated and Germanic, seems to have originated much further down in Central Eastern Europe. So this is where the anomalies come in. So did people migrate from the north, or did they migrate upwards? They probably did different things at different times according to the climate. And that is really what the archaeologists have to concede is the most plausible explanation. Yes, so it says old Europe Mesolithic population genes mixed with the Anatolia genes made up the Vinca or the Vinca genes. And the genes are not the exact same as the Serbian population have today. And what we have now, of course, is a lot more mixing because people are traveling more and interbreeding. So the specific Vinca gene is not really found today, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So now we get to the Indus Valley connection. Advanced cities, the Indus Valley had with grid layouts, drainage system, very advanced drainage system, and uniform brick sizes. Of course, their own writing system, officially influenced, and it's very influential on other cultures. So the Indus Valley civilization could have actually come from this area of Europe and spread out to the Indus Valley. That's not a popular theory, but it's just as likely as the Indus Valley culture moving outwards. Because remember what we said to start with, there are similarities in the writing and the art that was found with the Indus Valley, their patterns, the way that they actually use scrolls and pattern designs, very, very similar. So one culture was definitely influencing the other. So around 3,600 years ago, the official story says there was a drought in the region, but they can't make their minds up whether it was 3,600 years ago or a bit later. So the official story of why the Indus Valley civilization collapsed was, one, it was invaded. Well, what to me comes out when I'm looking at this stuff is assimilation rather than invasion, because these people all traded with each other. The Indus Valley traded as far as Persia. So it wouldn't really make sense that they were at war all the time, because they were trading with each other. The trading was what really made the Indus Valley civilization. So very interesting. I think so, anyway. And so they say the Indus Valley could have actually come to an end through invasion, crop failure, disease, collapse of trade. But basically, they say this civilization disappeared and it traded from Mesopotamia to the Persian Gulf. So all through Europe, it would have gone all through Europe. So they traded, and this is on record, they did trade with the Balkan regions. So I'm going to get into an article now, which I found absolutely fascinating. And this all came out from me looking at the Tartarian Tablets. I'd kind of put something in a folder. And last night I started looking through this stuff and I thought, yes, this is going to be fantastic for a show, and probably several shows. The title of this paper is Balkan Cultural Influence on Indus Valley Civilization by Jayakumar Ramasamy, and it's available on academia.edu. So the abstract to this says, the fish symbolism and the fish ritual pit used in Lepenski in Serbia appears all of a sudden in the Indus Valley inscription symbols. In other words, it looks like it came from nowhere. The implication is that the people from the Balkan area could have migrated into the Indus Valley in ancient times, or, as I said earlier, the other way around, into the Balkans after they officially disappeared. So if there was some kind of big problem in the Indus Valley with the climate, or the rivers dried up, it looks like they would have moved into the regions with their trading partners. It would make sense, wouldn't it? Absolutely would make sense. And they went as far as Scandinavia. So this is very interesting, because he's saying that in the Indus Valley, their mother goddess was the Yoni symbol, the mother or the rebirth of the soul. And the second possibility, he says, is that the figures could also indicate the Smasana Kayana pit, which is the modified form of an embryo-shaped altar, which was common with the Vinca as well as the Indus Valley. So here we get this runic connection which comes through, and this symbolism connection, because it was a matriarchal system. It was a goddess system. So in these houses in Serbia and across Central Eastern Europe, they would find these goddess statues, little things. They were small, and some of them look a bit alien looking, but I don't want to get into that. That was probably the stylization of them. But he says gradually over a period, the Indus symbol gradually changes according to the idea of new invaders into the Indian subcontinent, or new traders and new immigrants, basically. I mean, I don't see why, without the evidence of a huge battle or battles, that they had to be at war. This is something that comes up a lot. And there are certain battles that are meant to have happened in the British Isles that there's no evidence of. And I looked into those a few years ago. I'll have to look up this stuff again, because it's all going to tie in to the Shattered Isles project. But it says this original embryo-shaped altar is transformed into the Yoni-shaped altar in the later phase of the Indus Valley culture. So in other words, they had this influence from somewhere. Could it have been the Vinca, who predated the Indus Valley civilization? Well, the answer is probably, or could be, yes. So the evidence is available in the excavation site at Lepenski Vir in Serbia, what we were just talking about earlier. The similarity of cultural ideas between Lepenski culture and the Indus Valley culture was brought to my notice, says the writer, and he's got a citation there. This is in the paper. So it's a very interesting paper, this. I'm going to post them underneath this video after the show. And this lady, Miss Jadranka, she pointed out that the fish symbolism of the Lipensky culture is very, very similar to the Indus Valley fish symbolism. And in addition to the fish symbolism, the funeral pit of Lipensky Vir is also looking similar to the Smasana Kayana pit of the Indus Valley culture. Hope you're following this. I'll try to make it very, very simple. The similarity of the ritual pit further supports my idea, says the writer, of the fish symbolism theory. Well, what an interesting paper, an academic paper. And we never hear of this stuff, but there are so many of these which link together these supposedly distinct civilizations, because of course it's much easier for academia to say, oh, one area invaded the other and they conquered them, that's why they disappeared. Well, maybe they didn't disappear, maybe they just assimilated. Because if we look at the Scythians, they were pretty advanced, but they were very, very organized. But of course, they must have been a conglomeration of many different tribal influences into a kind of rough and assimilated culture. So, yeah, it says the Vinca script, same as the runes of Scandinavia, Britain, and Germany. So the runes existed 2,000 years before the Mesopotamian system of writing. So the Vinca or the Vinca could be at least 8,000 years old if the runes are based on the Vinca script, you see? So that you've got to make your own mind up about that. And I'll put the picture up again so you can see it. And I'll put the papers up underneath this show. So the question is, was the Vinca based on or influenced by the runic symbols? Or were the runic symbols of Northern Europe based on the Vinca? We don't know. The pottery of the Vinca was found all the way across Central Eastern Europe, Bulgaria, Romania. Remember, it started in Serbia. Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, Hungary, Moldova. Pretty big area, that. And the script was used, remember, before the Sumerian or Egyptian hieroglyphs. So we're going pre-Egyptian. A lot of people make a really big deal about ancient Egypt because academia has said that we have to. But when I did that show about pharaohs and the control of people through the mind control system, this pharaonic system, well, they weren't very advanced at all. And of course, they had a death cult. They wanted to take all their material objects into the afterlife, and they spent years getting all this crap ready to take with them. So they weren't advanced in their thinking at all. So these civilizations seem to have more of a connected culture and more of an interconnected culture and more of a connection to their own form of divinity than the pharaonic system. And that is something that's not pointed out very often. So yes, this script, as far as it's been found, is mainly in burial sites. But what was peculiar to the Vinca culture, and this goes into Bulgaria across Romania, is that the cave dwelling system was used rather than megalithic sites. So the megalith builders were different from these people. They didn't build big palatial structures or big structures like the dolmens and the ancient bomb shelters. This is what's, even though they do spread across Europe, they are from a different time. And one of the writers that I've been reading this stuff is he said that there could be this druidic influence, that, you know, the Druids could have been influenced by this as well, because that would make sense, because they were Gallic, which was the Romans called that Celtica. So the French region going into Germany was called Celtica in the Roman times. I've just been looking at all these old maps. So all these countries, we've got to remember that where they found this stuff, were suppressed by the invading Muslim armies and, of course, by these Marxist communist governments which took them over. So not only did we have the invasion of 500 years, which wiped out pretty much all of the history of these countries, we also had the communism. So, yeah, huge areas of ex-communist countries have never been excavated. I've traveled across Bulgaria, Romania, and from Greece, really, and Turkey, Bulgaria, Romania. And in Greece, there's a lot of excavation. In Bulgaria and Romania, not a lot at all. And Bulgaria, probably hardly any. And what's here, or where you find, where you find things in these places, is really government controlled. And as I said earlier, I have heard stories of real suppression of outlandish findings in these countries from people who lived there during the communist era. So the mere fact that we find anything in these places is a bit of a miracle, really, because they're not excavated at all. It's nothing at all like Greece and Turkey, where you got a lot of excavations. So yeah, it looks like we've got the swastika as originating in Central Eastern Europe. And previously, of course, it's been attributed to Buddhism and to Asia. But that's not the case. The swastika was used in Central Eastern Europe before it was used in the East. And the swastika was actually discovered in Bulgaria, in the Devataska cave, and it dated around 6000 BC. So the thing is, with these Central Eastern European countries, is they have not been excavated to any great degree. The government does not put money into that. The EU will only give money for certain areas to be excavated. So the mass of these countries is undiscovered. So this is something to be taken into consideration. So if we're finding evidence of this Vinca culture, it must have been huge. So in Asia, the swastika first appeared in archaeological records in 3000 BC. We're going back to 6000 at least for Central Eastern Europe and the swastika. And they say that the swastika really was part of this Indus Valley culture also, 3000 BC. So I've got some more notes here. I'm going to do some more shows on this, hopefully. I hope you're finding this interesting. I am. So yes, this Vinca culture, the Vinca culture, it lasted about 1,000 years. It was big, it was organized and very creative. Very large villages, goddess orientated, matriarchal society, mainly goddess female figures were found, and these were found in burials and in people's houses. So a lot of these were found in Serbia. So it followed through until the present, actually, in a way. There's another paper I was looking at. It says, in a way, the present cultures, the old cultures of Bosnia, Macedonia, Albania, Kosovo, Serbia, Bulgaria, have actually remained in the villages quite stable. That a lot of these old traditions are still there, and they are quite uniform through the countries. There are a lot of similarities. So this culture went to the Middle East. It went as far as the Altai Mountains, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, as far as Pakistan. Incredible, that, isn't it? So it ended, they say, about 4500 BC. Excuse me. It was based on this older culture we've said earlier, but I'll reiterate, the Lepensky, 9500 to 7000 BC, and the Starlevo, 8000 to 5400 BC. So the Anatolian and the European genes were mixed with these previous cultures. So that's another interesting thing, because if you go to Turkey, there's all sorts of different people there. There's the Turkic look obviously spread out, but There are many, many blonde people in Turkey. There's a lot of different types in Turkey. So Turkey's a big melting pot and always was. So it moved into Hungary, Croatia, Germany, and Slovenia, which would make sense because if it's over in Serbia, would move that way. So they say that the Starlevo culture, which predated the Vinca, originated in Anatolia. So that's where you get the Anatolian genes from. So the Vinca were more advanced than these previous cultures. And there was a 1,000-year gap between the Lepesky Via and the Vinca culture. So 1,000 years, what does that mean? There's a 1,000-year gap. It just means that they only found things that they can date to a certain time. That's all that means. And there was equality of the sexes, and some writers have compared them to this later Druidic culture, which was Gallic and Britannic. So yeah, they used caves, and that's where the artifacts were found. So this is interesting because the later Druids, they didn't build temples. They worshipped in the oak groves. So these people were probably the same. And you've got to remember also, of course, that the heavy forestation of these areas would have meant there was lots of oak groves. Of course, in Central Eastern Europe, the oak is a national symbol. And there are many, many oak forests here. So it's likely that the Druidic culture was an expression of these earlier cultures. It's not me saying that, by the way. It's the world of academia too. So, yeah. So the Balkan region has this oral poetry tradition, and it talks about the magic of caves. Bulgaria, Romania, to Greece, of course, Macedonia, lots of caves, but especially in the Balkan mountain region. And these caves are where they've found the most amazing artifacts. So the history was lost, of course, through the Ottoman Empire and later through communism. And then we're basing a lot of this, remember, on the Roman history. So we've got to kind of discount a lot of the Roman history and look at these recent archaeological finds. So the Starlevo culture turned into the Vinca culture, and there was another culture called the Cucuteni Trapilia culture, which went from 4,800 to 3,000 BC and was discovered in Macedonia. All the same region, really, all the same place. Bulgaria borders Macedonia, Greece borders Macedonia. So Serbia borders Macedonia, I think, and it borders Bulgaria, obviously. So, yeah, so none of it is too far-fetched at all. And so, yes, there's a mass of these female ceremonial ceramic figures found mainly in Serbia, where the Vinca culture or the Vinca culture is thought to have originated around the Belgrade area. So this is history that we don't get to hear about, especially in the West. So there is a connection, possibly to the Tuatha De Danann and the goddess Dana or Diana, because this goddess that they worshipped, which was found in Serbia in all these houses and in the graves, they say it's very likely where the Diana goddess may have come from. Of course, this is something that we get through Greek or Greco-Roman history, but we're going back much further here. And there was another goddess called Teuta, as in Teutonic. And in Albania, this apparently became a very popular name for women. It meant a tribal woman, and it was also the name of an Albanian queen. So we're going as far as Albania here. Well, why not go as far as Italy? It's only across the water, you see. So the whole of this European continent was probably more connected, obviously pre-communism and pre-Roman, pre-Ottoman, not in that order. But if we're going back to 7,000 to 8,000 years ago, it looks like there was a more interconnected and civilized culture than later. this later culture described by the Romans. So possibly a decentralized society. This is another thing that came up about the Vinca culture, is that they had autonomy. They didn't have monarchies. They seemed to have autonomous regions, which kind of worked things out for themselves. So, in other words, a kind of functioning small government, anarchical government governing system where the people governed themselves. So, we have to ask, are we at the end of this present civilization? And will another civilization, such as the Vinca, arise out of this degenerated one? And of course, history tells us that it will, because that's always happened. So the degeneration and the insularity and the narcissism and the short-sighted view that people have of the world and their inability to see anything outside themselves is a sign of the times. It's the end of this current civilization. So those who know this can move forward. That's the very interesting thing about the times that we're living in, I think. So yes, this society was free thinking and autonomous. That seems to be the consensus, that word we hear a lot, of these people from 7 to 8,000 years ago that seem to disappear, according to the academics, 4,500 BC. So I hope you found that useful and interesting. It's an area of research which I will be springboarding off onto other very interesting avenues. And in history, one thing just leads to another. This is what I find fascinating about it. And why this stuff isn't more widely reported, I have no idea. But again, it's down to insularity and people just watching a news cycle called the two lies. Well, maybe the two lies weren't as prevalent 7 to 8,000 years ago. Maybe people were more connected to higher intelligence. So that's something to look forward to again, isn't it? So I hope you enjoyed that. I put it together rather quickly, but I think that it's information which should be of interest. And I haven't heard that put together before in that way. So I hope that was useful. Do support the show if you can. Remember, I'm back here every Monday now. info@windowsontheworld.net. If you'd like to support the show, you can do that on the homepage, or you can email me at the info@windowsontheworld.net email. And do keep sending in any relevant information. Stay in touch through the website, and you can join our Discord group. The link is on the homepage at windowsontheworld.net. I often forget to mention that. And thanks to everyone who supports the show. And remember, spread the shows around, share them, because the archive is full of information and it's very marginalized. So until next time, thanks a lot. And I'm going to have a look at the comments.